Hi, I'm Dr. J. Varma, and welcome to Thermometer. On this channel, I check the temperature of health in the US and around the world and give you expert insights on infectious diseases and public health. This is the weekly episode of Inside Outbreaks. On Inside Outbreaks, I review the latest outbreaks of infectious diseases occurring here in the United States and around the world that you need to know about. And I do this with my friend and colleague, Jon Epstein, a veterinarian, virologist, and disease ecologist who, like me, has spent his career tracking dangerous infectious diseases across all corners of the earth. Thank you, Jon, for joining me today.
Hey, Jay. How are you doing today?
Good. It's great to have you. I know we're always talking about the risks around the world and things like that, but today life is pretty good. How about for
Good.
you?
I feel like we have to start on an upbeat note because we do tend to talk about some pretty depressing issues.
We are kind of the doomsayers, and I do appreciate people watching and realizing that one of the ways that, at least for me, I've always felt like the best way to cope in the world is to actually, when you know about the risks out there, you can actually enjoy yourself because you feel like you're prepared. And
We should always be grateful for the days we're healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk this week about a new alert that was released by CDC. And since both you and I are live in New York, it was also one released by New York State warning people about the risks of dengue virus infection. Okay, so this is a new alert that came out from CDC and from New York State about a disease called dengue virus. So before we get into the specifics of that alert, Jon, why don't you let the viewers know a little bit about what is dengue virus?
So dengue virus is a virus that is spread by mosquitoes, and it typically is carried by people. There is evidence that some animals can carry it, but primarily it circulates among people, and it's a tropical disease historically. It's one we think about as being most prevalent in warmer climates, particularly where there are places with high human population density, so places in India or Southeast Asia or South America. But, this is something that has the potential to spread as mosquitoes move into other areas.
Yeah. And one of the things that's always, I think, perplexed those of us in public health, and it has absolutely been one of the biggest challenges to developing, vaccines or even treatments for dengue, is that there are actually 4 different types of this virus, right? And those different types of the virus create challenges. Why don't you talk just a little bit briefly about the different, what we call serotypes of dengue?
Right. So in general, I guess we should talk about the symptomology here. In general, dengue causes a pretty severe fever, painful malaise, and in some cases it can be fatal due to the body's immune response to infection. And so it's a pretty serious disease. And when there are outbreaks, they tend to be in large numbers, again, because it happens in fairly populous parts of the world. And this idea that there are multiple different serotypes means that there are viruses that cause slightly different immune reactions. And the theory goes, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jay, but sometimes if you get infected serially by different serotypes, the reaction upon second infection can be more severe than the first time you get it because of the way your body's immune system responds to the infection. And so these different serotypes are related viruses that cause a distinct immune response in people.
Yeah, this is one of the far and away, and we'll talk in a little bit about the vaccine challenges, but this, what was called antibody-mediated enhancement or antibody-dependent enhancement of your immune response is really just a nightmare when it comes to trying to figure out how to protect people against dengue and really convince them that, in fact, that vaccines, as they get developed, will actually be helpful because there are some real tricky nuances to this. But let's get back into the public health aspect. So, as I mentioned at the outset, CDC in New York State have released an alert telling people in the United States to be on the watch for dengue. So what's happening? Why is CDC and New York State warning people about dengue, Jon?
Well, this is really important because, as we said earlier, this has historically been classically a tropical disease, something we think about happening around the equator, just north and south of the equator. But with climate change, with warming temperatures, we have been seeing over the past few decades an expansion in the range of the mosquitoes that spread viruses like dengue. And so rather than just being restricted to some of the warmer, more tropical areas, we are seeing mosquitoes in places like the Caribbean cause infections of dengue virus, of other viruses like chikungunya virus and even cases of malaria. And so we're seeing a spread of cases in humans because we are seeing the range of these mosquitoes expand. And what this warning is about is that we are starting to see more and more cases of dengue transmission in places in the Caribbean and even in the southern United States around the Gulf, where we know that we have the mosquitoes and where it's seasonally warm enough to sustain transmission cycles and mosquitoes. And this is a real problem because now there's a real risk beyond just getting those irritating mosquito bites that can cause itchiness. And we know that in America, we have other viral infections like West Nile virus that is carried by mosquitoes. But now we can add dengue to that list of potential infections we might get, specifically in the Caribbean area, Puerto Rico, and in the southern United States.
Yeah, in fact, I think one of the things that's really worrisome here is the fact that you have really two risks that are going on right now, right? You have Americans that are traveling to these places and getting infected.
Yeah.
But then the other thing you have is, as you have more and more Americans that are infected that are now back in the United States, when you have these mosquitoes around, they can bite you and then spread it to somebody else. So that's what we get, local transmission as well. So you've got travel cases and you have cases that are being transmitted locally. And, I just wanted to, you described a little bit earlier about, what dengue is, but let me give the viewers a little bit of information on what happens about you if you're a human and you get sick. So first of all, like a lot of viruses, not every infection leads to disease. About 1 in 4 infections actually lead to symptoms. Your likelihood of getting severe symptoms, as it is with a lot of other viruses, can depend on having other prior immune conditions. So if you're a young baby, if you're pregnant, if you're older, if you have certain medical conditions, you can get a more severe illness. But the other piece of this, of course, is what we mentioned previously, that people with previous dengue infections might get it even worse the next time around, which again is very different than all of what we talk about when we talk about the flu or other things, where we say, hey, the next time around, your prior antibodies are going to protect you. What are the symptoms of this? Classically, you get a very high fever and a very severe headache, and you've got pain all over. You get pain in the back of your eyes. You get pain in your joints, pains in your muscles. You get a rash. It feels like your bones are breaking, like your body is just aching all over. And then there's a lot of other symptoms that you can have. People can get belly pain and vomiting. And in very severe cases, it can lead to what we call a hemorrhagic type fever, where your blood vessels get leaky and your blood pressure drops. And unfortunately, we don't actually have a drug to treat this. And all we can really offer people is what's called supportive care. We can give you medications like Tylenol for your fever and pain. We can give you fluids to help support your blood pressure. We can give you transfusions of blood products if you're breaking down your red blood cells, your platelets, you're getting leakage of other things. So that's really where the quality of medical care matters a lot. And of course, remember, if you're traveling in one of these remote areas, well, even if you're not in a remote area, let's say you're at a beautiful resort, you can't always guarantee that you're going to get the highest level of intensive unit care that you might need if you get a severe illness like this. So it is really something to be worried about. And I mentioned previously a little bit about vaccines, and I won't go into this in too much detail because it is really complex, but there are basically 2 vaccines that are available around the world, but only one of them is currently available here in the United States. And again, because of this weirdness of the way the immune system works, this vaccine is only recommended for a very narrow population. It's basically recommended for people who are between the ages of 6 years old and 45 who have previously had a dengue infection. Okay. So I realize that sounds kind of crazy, but you pretty much had to have been infected before to get this vaccine. John?
No, it is crazy. And I mean, what I'm hearing is no vaccine, no treatment. Sounds like you don't want to get bitten by mosquitoes.
Yeah, you pretty much, I don't really love mosquitoes. And I know, John, you and I have had joked a lot about the fact that I don't really like bats either.
Don't bring bats into this. Here's one disease finally that has nothing to do with bats, all right?
Exactly.
But bats do happen to control mosquitoes, so maybe we can bring bats into this.
There you go. Okay.
Bats are one of the best natural controls for mosquitoes. But really what I was getting at is if you're going to be traveling to an area in the tropics or in the Caribbean, really, really protect yourself against mosquito bites. Long sleeve clothing, repellent, particularly at dusk and dawn when some of the mosquitoes that can spread disease are most active. That's really when you want to be really vigilant so you don't accidentally get infected and even worse, bring something back with you when you come home.
Yeah, and we talked about last week, for those of you who are regular watchers of our show, or you're interested in going back to watch what we talked about last week, we talked about another virus called Orapooch, which again is transmitted by mites, flying midges or things that fly through the air. We've got chikungunya virus, Zika, even the risk of malaria. So good mosquito protection, as Jon just mentioned, is really, really important, particularly for dengue, but also for a range of other nasty viruses and parasites that you might get. Okay, so anything else you wanted to add about dengue, Jon? Otherwise, we may move on to something that's some potentially good news for people.
Yeah, let's get on to some good news. I think people need some relief at this point.
Exactly. Well, the good news is about Ebola. Well, which I know sounds a little strange, but basically to bring people up to speed, there's very little we can do for people who get Ebola infection. There are some treatments that are available that are essentially cocktails of antibodies. So these are things that are synthesized in a laboratory to basically block a very specific strain of Ebola virus called Zaire Ebola viruses. And they've been studied in trials done in Africa to show the effectiveness against this strain. So this is, if you happen to get sick with Ebola virus, you can get these treatments and they do have some impact on your disease. But really, we're still waiting for something that's other than just a antibody. So just something that's synthesizing or mimicking the body's immune system. So Jon, why don't you give us an update on the possibility of a drug for Ebola coming out sometime in the future if the research plays out the way we hope it will?
Yeah, look, this is great news. And one of the reasons that what we have so far in terms of vaccine and experimental treatments for Ebola is really focused on the Zaire Ebola virus. And there are 6 different types of Ebola viruses in this group of viruses. But because of the big outbreak in 2014, that's when the most people were getting infected. And there's the most opportunity to really test the efficacy of drugs and vaccines. And so much of the development has been focused on Zaire Ebola virus. But as we talked about last week, there's an outbreak of a different type of Ebola that's been going on called Sudan Ebola virus. This is in Uganda. And the drugs that work on Zaire Ebola virus and the vaccine that was developed for it doesn't necessarily protect against infection with this type of Ebola. So now there's good news. There's a new drug that was recently tested in trials using a non-human primate model, a macaque model, called obeldesivir. And the good news about this is it showed incredibly good efficacy at protecting monkeys in this trial against infection with Sudan Ebola virus. So number one, here's a drug that shows really good efficacy when given within 24 hours of infection. So you get exposed, you start taking this drug, and it is protective against disease. And that's excellent. And the other great thing about this is it even looks like it has some efficacy against other types of Ebola viruses. So now we have a therapeutic agent, again, still in trials, still at the research phase, but shows promise for protecting against Sudan Ebola virus and potentially other types of Ebola viruses as well.
Yeah, and the reason this is, I'm going to cone out just for a little bit so that people are aware, there has really not been the progress as a society, as a world that we need on developing drugs to treat viruses. We have incredible drugs to treat HIV. They can't cure it yet, but they can basically act to keep people healthy for the entire duration of their life and to reduce transmission. We do have drugs to treat and cure hepatitis C, but for the broad range of other viruses, all of the drugs that we have are really not very, very effective at all. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that vaccines have been historically been so effective. But what we're seeing, of course, is that as new diseases emerge, it's difficult to develop a vaccine in time for them. That's one. And number two, we see a lot of resistance and hesitancy to vaccines. So there's a real need to really invest very heavily in drugs to treat people with diseases like Ebola, because there is an effective Ebola vaccine, but we can't always guarantee that everybody's going to get it. So I think it's important for us here on this show, not just to highlight the threats, but also to highlight some of the opportunities there are to keep us healthier in a world of infectious diseases.
Yeah, that was a good cone out, Jay. Good explanation.
Great.
And what's also good about this is that, other types of treatments, which tend to be in the form of antibodies that are, delivered to people who are already infected, is that those require refrigeration, and there's really difficult logistics involved in delivering those in some of the remote places that experience Ebola outbreaks. This new drug, if it proves to be effective in people, is a pill that would be much easier to deliver in a crisis. It'll be more heat stable. It can get to where it needs to go much easier, much less expensive. So that's another great thing about this potentially effective drug.
Yeah, monoclonal antibodies are really wonderful, but they have tremendous challenges when it comes to delivery, particularly in places that have limited healthcare infrastructure because of all the storage and maintenance requirements and the need for injections as well too. So. Great. Well, Jon, thank you very much for joining me this week for Inside Outbreaks. It's always great to catch up on the latest news about diseases around the world. And if you who are watching right now are interested in more updates about infectious diseases and public health, please hit the like button, put some comments in the comment section, and most importantly, subscribe to Thermometer, where you're going to get the latest information and insights into infectious diseases and public health and information about outbreaks that you need to know about. Thanks for joining.
Bye.